Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace be upon everyone. Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time on this channel, welcome. I have to say, first of all, that I appreciate every single student has been consistently watching my videos on the SAT Math Prep series, and I'm excited to bring you another question, as you can see on the screen. So we have the question 9 plus 6i, open bracket, 6i, close bracket. The first thing you have to do is to understand what I, open bracket, 6i, close bracket stands for. As you can see, we're dealing with a symbol I, and in this case, the symbol I is the symbol for imaginary numbers, right? So that's the symbol for imaginary numbers. And imaginary numbers in this particular case is the 6i. But we have another I multiplied by it. So the first way you have to approach this is for you to think about I as a variable. Say you are given x, open bracket, 6x. Well, this is the same thing as saying x multiplied by 6x, which is the same thing as 6x squared. So even though I is the symbol for imaginary or 6i is an imaginary number, we're going to pretend that the I within 6i is a variable, even though it is not actually a variable, it's an imaginary number. So that's the way you think about it when you're working with it. You don't have to overthink it or fear that, oh, I don't really understand what's going on. We're just going to solve it like we're going to solve a variable. So 9 plus I multiplied by 6i. So that's the same thing as 9 plus 6i squared. Now, the next thing you have to do is to determine what is I squared. Well, since we're doing imaginary numbers, you should expect on your SATs that they're always going to give you a portion of the question where they tell you that I equals the square root of negative I, so that you would know that you're dealing with imaginary numbers, complex numbers. Because if they don't put it there, some students unfortunately might assume that I is simply a variable, and they'll be like, oh, this is the answer. The answer is this. But that's not the answer, because I is an imaginary number equal to the square root of negative 1. Now, a quick trick I can teach you is this, and just focus on everything I'm going to teach you in color blue. The value of I here is the square root of negative 1. I squared is the square root of negative 1 all squared, which is the same thing as the square root of negative 1 multiplied by the square root of negative 1, and that combined is going to give you the answer negative 1. So I squared is literally equals to negative 1. The next thing is, if you think about I cubed, right? I cubed is the same thing as I squared multiplied by I, which is the same thing as saying negative 1 multiplied by I. So I cubed is actually going to equal negative I. That is this. I would advise you guys to put this down in your notes if you don't already have it. So if we do I to the fourth, what you end up with, I to the fourth is simply I cubed multiplied by I. So I cubed, we saw that to be negative I. So you have negative I multiplied by I, and negative I multiplied by I is the same thing as negative I squared, and negative I squared is the same thing as negative 1, so that is positive 1. So I to the fourth is positive 1. Anyways, my point is this. Everything that I'm putting in the red box is just basically what you should make sure you have in your note, right? So this is this one is this one, and with this is this. From 4, everything is going to start repeating. So from 5, I apologize, everything will start improving. So I to the 5th is going to simply be the square root of negative 1. I to the 6th is going to be negative 1. I to the 7th is going to be negative I, and I to the 8th is going to be positive 1. You guys can try that in your notes. So it's a really good trick for you to memorize and to know how to solve to get it. in order for you to be able to do questions in case you have a question that is more complicated than usual. So now we know 9 plus 6i squared, and they already told us I equals the square root of -1. So they've told us that we're dealing with imaginary numbers. You just have to think about what is I squared. Well, we know I squared to be -1. So hence 9 plus 6i squared is the same thing as 9 plus 6 times -1. So 9 minus 6 is 3. So that our answer 9 plus I open bracket 6i is actually going to equals 3. And 3 is the answer to this question. Make sure you really study complex numbers and imaginary numbers, because some questions may be tricky, but this is just the way to solve it, and this is our answer. If you want to see more complex numbers questions, just know that they're all over on my channel, and they are currently on the SAT Math Prep series, because you're going to be seeing more questions on complex numbers, as well as different SAT type questions, from quadratics to systems of equations to linear equations to graphs to scatter plots to all of that, percentages and proportions. So make sure you check out that playlist. I wish you guys all the very best, and if you're currently struggling, do not forget this: patience and your success takes time. So do not give up, because it takes time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.